Alright, you get in here. Have a seat. The Don's got something brand new for you, so I need you to open your ears and close your mouth. First things first. You doing okay? Of course you are. You're above ground and you're still breathing. And of course, Thanksgiving this week. So I'm assuming you got quite a few things to be thankful for. If not, you can be thankful for the Don blessing you with this real trio gaming spiel. Now let me say this. I'm thankful for all you guys. The subs, the viewers, the love you show me. Even the occasional hater who tries to drop something snarky in the comments. All engagement is good engagement when it comes to YouTube. I might not be the biggest creator out there, but with you guys at my back, we still run the streets when it comes to this gaming YouTube stuff. If you're new here, by the way, welcome. Here's the deal. I cover retro games, indie titles, and cool hardware. Basically, if it's gaming, we're on it. So if you want to join the Mafia, all you gotta do is hit that subscribe button, and I'm gonna make you a made man, just like that. And if you really want to show love, hit that bell icon and turn on your notifications. I got plenty of content coming, so you're not gonna want to miss it. Alright, now that we got the preliminaries out the way, walk with me back to 2003. If you had told me that EA was about to drop a game that mashed up hip-hop and professional wrestling, and that game would actually be a hit, I'd have thought you were out your mind. However, EA had Aki on board. That was the same team behind those legendary Nintendo 64 wrestling games like No Mercy and WCW NWO Revenge. And of course you got Def Jam, which was a name so iconic in hip-hop that even if you don't follow the genre, you've heard of it, or at least you know about one of their artists. Maybe it's a legacy act like LL, Method Man, or Run DMC, or somebody who's more current like YG and Big Sean. Def Jam's roster gave the game instant credibility, and EA, for better or worse, knew how to push a franchise. Fast forward to a little over a year later. 2004's Def Jam Fight for New York dropped, and it leveled up everything. The cast, the gameplay, the atmosphere, and for a lot of us, myself included, it's one of the greatest video games of all time. However, that's not the story we're here to talk about. Because after Fight for New York, as a lot of you may know, EA released a third Def Jam game. And when people talk about it, it's usually to say how bad it was. But here's the thing. Was it really that bad? And with that, Goombas, I'd like to welcome you to the first installment of an all-new series that I like to call Was It Really That Bad? I look at a game that's considered a failure, look at its positives and negatives, try to figure out what went wrong, and try to answer the question, was it really that bad? We're kicking things off by taking a look at Def Jam Icon, EA's ill-fated attempt to reinvent the franchise. Was it as bad as everyone says it is? Or was it just too ambitious for its own good? And are there any redeeming qualities? Well, time to dive in. So I'm not going to waste time diving into the entire development history of Def Jam Icon. Matt McMuscles already has a great video covering that, which I'll link to in the description. The short version is this. After Fight for New York, several key members of the original development studio left Electronic Arts. EA then handed the reins to EA Chicago, which was led by Kudo Tsunoda. At the time, EA Chicago was working on Fight Night Round 3, a game that's considered one of the best boxing titles ever made. It was a showcase for the 7th generation of gaming consoles, which was the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. The graphics in the game were so good that they were able to tell the story without using an HUD. Bruises, sluggish movement, facial damage were all visual cues that replaced the traditional meters. It was an integration of both graphics and gameplay, and I thought that this was going to be the future of gaming. Turns out that wasn't the case, but that's a different story altogether. Few games have done what Fight Night Round 3 did. LA Noire came close with its interrogation sequences, but again, that's another topic. Not only were the graphics on point, Fight Night's analog controls allowed unprecedented control over punch direction and strength. This system made it easy for new fans to pick up and play while adding a layer of strategy and depth that was unseen in boxing games. Kudo wanted to apply a similar philosophy to Def Jam Icon, stripping away the wrestling style moves from the earlier games and focused on a more street brawling system. The idea sounded good on paper. Make a fighting game that didn't feel like other fighting games while also making it feel closer to hip hop culture. For whatever reason, Kudo believed that one of the ways to go was to remove the blazing moves. If you remember from Vendetta or Fight for New York, you knew that the blazing attacks were the over-the-top finishing moves that you could use to end the match or at least do a lot of damage to your opponent. As you could guess, things didn't pan out. EA Chicago would eventually be shut down, Kudo would be left go, and perhaps worse yet, both a planned sequel to Icon, I'll talk about that later, and an upcoming Marvel project that they were working on both got cancelled. But for now, let's focus on the game itself. To the game's credit, Icon leans heavily into hip-hop culture. The game's main story mode, Build a Label, puts you in the shoes of a rising record executive. You create your character with a slider system similar to Fight Night. From there, you link up with Curtis Carver, a record exec played by real-life former Def Jam president Kevin Liles. Once you prove yourself, you start managing artists. So the game's plot's not connected to Fight for New York or Vendetta. There's no D-Mob, no Crow, and no underground fight scene. Instead, you're financing albums, handling beefs, paying bail money, deciding whether or not to buy a video game system for Ghostface Killah, reimbursing T.I. for stolen ice, or financing Mike Jones's investment. And you're doing this all from a computer in your office. Now, the label management doesn't stay confined to boardrooms and contracts. It frequently spills into the streets, clubs, and even the set of 106 & Park. This is where you'll be spending most of the game. You'll find yourself throwing down with paparazzi who get too close, stalkers, and rival rappers who want to test your credibility. So yeah, as one media outlet put it, this is basically Suge Knight Simulator 2K7. Wrong def, but you get the idea. In the world of Def Jam Icon, running a label means literally fighting for your brand. Honestly, I wish the label management side had been fleshed out more. It was sometimes more fun than the actual fighting. Imagine if they had turned that into a full mode with deeper mechanics, balancing contracts with street level conflicts. This is one aspect of the game that really feels like a missed opportunity. I wouldn't mind if someone put out a similar game with just the label building. If you play your cards right, then you can date some lovely ladies such as former video vixen Melissa Ford and R&B singer Summer Walker. You can also visit a tattoo shop, a barber, a clothing store, and a jewelry store to buy some fresh gear. Like Fight for New York, the game includes real-world brands like Ecko, Phat Farm, and even Air Jordans by Nike. However, unlike Fight for New York, this has no visual effect on the fighting. Instead, they just add to your style points. Style points are the game's scoring system that determines if you can reach Icon status. Of course, if this game came out today, I can only imagine EA putting these in as microtransactions. Throughout the game's story, you'll deal with label wars, corrupt cops, and even a shady politician. It's clear that the game was trying to comment on how hip-hop had become more about the business rather than the music. The message doesn't fully land, but I respect the attempt. It's one of the few things I like about the game. One of the biggest issues with Def Jam Icon is the game's roster. Fight for New York was stacked. The game had nearly 70 fighters, mixing rappers, celebrities, and original characters. The game felt like a celebration of hip-hop culture in all its forms. You had legends like Ice-T and Flavor Flav, current names like Exhibit and David Banner, and rising stars like Bless and Comp, even cultural outsiders like actor Danny Trejo, Jacob the Jeweler, and Henry Rollins. It was very surprising and fun. Icon by comparison feels stripped down. The roster shrinks to just 29 fighters, and several of them have to be unlocked. The lineup is basically whoever was hot in the mid-2000s. So you get T.I., Young Jeezy, and reggaeton singer Tego Calderon. There are a handful of veterans such as E40, Bun B, and Big Boy, but they were only thrown in there because they had new music at the time. Sticky Fingers and Method Man are also in the cast, but they're playing as different characters. Fat Joe can be unlocked with a code, but that's about it. And while you can romance several women in the game, there are no playable female characters at all. You don't even have the option to create one. That stands out even more when we remember that Fight for New York had female characters such as Lil' Kim and Carmen Electra. This added another layer of variety to the roster. Without that option, Def Jam Icon just basically feels like a sausage party. In short, Fight for New York felt like a tribute to the culture, pulling from different eras, regions, and styles. Icon, by contrast, felt like a slim playlist of mid-2000s radio hits. The roster wasn't just smaller, it lacked the variety that made its predecessor so memorable. The fighting system is where the game almost completely collapses. Like I said before, the developers tried to replicate what they did with Fight Night. However, it doesn't work as well because fighting games aren't boxing games. Yes, boxing is a form of fighting, but there's a difference between Fight Night and, say, Mortal Kombat. You got basic strikes, which are done using the face buttons. You've got analog stick attacks. You got grabs and throws, which are also done using the analog stick. You got defense modifiers, and there are the DJ controls. I'll talk about the DJ controls in a minute. But you can already see the issue here because there's too much to take into account, and it feels like it's more complicated than it needs to be. There's a lot of different moving parts, and you're going to have to do a lot of practice before you jump into a game. It almost feels like something that you'd see in a WWE game. But if you're a fan of games like Street Fighter, Tekken, hell, even Fight for New York, it's just way too complex and too much to learn. It doesn't help matters that the game feels sluggish either. And just like with Fight Night, you're supposed to tell how the fight is going by looking at the condition of your character. You know, ripped clothes, cuts, bruises, sluggish movement, etc. However, this also falls flat because the camera's pulled too far back and the muted visuals make it hard to read what's happening. So the things that worked in Fight Night, the close-up, one-on-one boxing, no HUD, they just don't translate as well here. The backdrops range from an Atlanta neighborhood to a gas station and even the set of 106 in Park. There might not be many arenas in the game, but you do get a fair amount of variety. There are some high points of the game's combat. For what it's worth, the attacks feel brutal and the hits feel like they hurt. Moreover, the environments sync to the music, objects and people move along to the beat, and there are various traps and other interactive features that players can take advantage of. The DJ controls let you scratch tracks mid-fight to activate these hazards manually, and you can also use it to switch the soundtrack to your advantage. This mechanic is actually one of the cooler parts of the game. By holding down a modifier button, the analog sticks essentially become turntables. You can scratch left or right to trigger stage-specific events, such as exploding gas pumps, bouncing cars, and even dancers who kick anyone who's dumb enough to get too close. If you do it at the right moment, these scratches add extra damage to combos and give you control of the fight's rhythm. Even cooler, you can use the DJ controls to switch to beat mid-match. If your fighter's track was playing, you'd gain a slight edge, while your opponent would be thrown off. On Xbox 360, this went a step further. You can import your own custom soundtrack, and the stage visuals would sync to whatever track you choose. Unfortunately, this was only in one game mode, and this only works for one fighter. Still, this gives the fights a unique feel like it's happening inside a music video. It made the music part of the gameplay, and it's a pretty cool feature. While the system wasn't fully realized, it laid groundwork for something special. Imagine what the developers could do if they built on this a bit further. Say, more interactive developments in the environments, deeper rhythm-based bonuses, or combo chains tied to scratching. If they had done a sequel with these game mechanics, those mechanics would really make it stand out amongst other fighting games. Even as it stands, the DJ controls remain one of the more redeemable qualities of the game. If Kudo Sonoda wanted to integrate hip-hop music into the combat, this was definitely a great start, all things considered. The soundtrack is pure mid-2000s hip-hop. You got Young Jeezy's Soul Survivor, you got It's Going Down by Young Jock, and you got T.I.'s What You Know. You also got some slightly older hits like Nas's Hate Me Now, and Redman and Method Man's The Rock Wilder. Back then, these tunes defined a moment. You heard them blasting out of car stereos, you heard them being played at clubs and parties, you even saw them on BET and MTV. You know, back when MTV still played music. And 2 decades later, Def Jam Icon feels like a time capsule. For older heads like me, it's a snapshot of mixtape culture, ringtone rap, and the beginning of Atlanta's rise in hip-hop. Still, compared to the broader cross-era playlist of Vendetta and Fight for New York, Icon's soundtrack feels narrow. Yeah, it's nostalgic, but that's because it's 2 decades old. It was still limited even back then. But again, for older heads like me, it's hard not to enjoy it. I mean, a lot of these tracks bang just as hard today as they did back then. Say what you will about the rest of the package, the soundtrack aged pretty well. So I guess I'd better answer the $1,000,000 question now, shouldn't I? Was Def Jam Icon really that bad? You know what, instead of giving me a straight up yes or no answer, I think I'm gonna cop out. Was the game as good as Fight for New York? Obviously not. Was the game as good as it could have been? No. But was the game as bad as people make it out to be? Also no. Now, just hear me out. When it comes to media, particularly books, movies, TV shows, or in this case a video game, sometimes you gotta judge it by what it tried to do, along with how well it was executed. With Def Jam Icon, Kudo Tsunoda was trying to do two different things. One, provide a commentary on hip-hop's business side, and two, integrate the music into the combat. Obviously, it didn't pan out the way they wanted it to, but there were sparks of something interesting. The high points of the game were definitely the story mode, the label management, and the DJ mechanics. Unfortunately, the fighting system, which is where you'll spend the majority of the game, dragged everything down, and following Fight for New York made this game's shortcomings even more glaring. See, here's the thing. Fight for New York wasn't just a fighting game, it was a tribute to hip-hop culture. It captured the four elements: breaking, DJing, graffiti, and MCing. It also embraced the lifestyle, the swagger, the fashion, and the attitude. You were rocking clothes made by Rocawear, you were wearing platinum chains, and you were getting the crowd on your side while impressing some pretty hot women. Without even alluding to the music outside of the soundtrack, Fight for New York was hip-hop culture at its biggest and best. On the flip side, Icon narrowed its focus to the business side of things, and in the process, it lost a lot of what made Fight for New York so special. Even with its shortcomings, it felt like all Icon needed to do was expand its cast, tighten up the gameplay, build upon the label mechanics, and expand on the DJ mechanics, and that would have been all the game would have needed. There were plans for a sequel with faster gameplay, better graphics, and even modes to create your own beats and your own fighting style. There's prototype footage that you can find on YouTube, and it looked promising. Sadly, EA Chicago's closure killed it. Now, I said it before and I'll say it again. Putting EA Chicago on Def Jam Icon, then sacking them after its failure, is akin to the Cleveland Browns playing Colin Kaepernick $25 million to play as an outside linebacker, then sacking him after one game because his stops weren't up to his passes. Even worse, Icon's story ends on a cliffhanger and there'll never be a resolution to it. For all its flaws, Icon had some interesting ideas going for it, and I believe it deserved another shot so it could build upon those ideas. Sadly, the next time we'd see the Def Jam logo attached to a video game would be Konami's Def Jam Rap Star, which was a karaoke game released in 2010. So we all know that Def Jam's Twitter has seemingly been hinting at a new game for the past several years. I should probably address the elephant in the room. You see, as much as fans dream about it, the chances of seeing another Def Jam fighting game are slim to none. You see, the biggest hurdle is licensing. Every rapper, every celebrity, every track, every likeness comes with royalty fees and contracts that will be a nightmare to renegotiate today. Modern rights management across labels, publishers, and streaming platforms adds layers of cost and complexity that just didn't exist the same way 20 years ago. Even a remaster of Fight for New York or Vendetta will mean relicensing dozens of artists and songs, clearing likenesses, and reconciling old agreements with new legal realities. And sadly, a few of the real-life figures who were featured in the games are no longer with us. Realistically, the best we could hope for is maybe Phil Spencer feels gracious enough to update the Xbox compatibility list one last time with the two titles, or maybe Sony will be gracious enough to add them to the PlayStation Classics. And of course, you can whip out your Raspberry Pi and sail the 7 seas. It's not glamorous, but it's plausible. I mean, a mobster can dream, can he? So earlier, I mentioned that along with Def Jam Icon 2, Electronic Arts also canceled a Marvel fighting game that EA Chicago had been working on. That cancellation still stings, even if it eventually paved the way for Marvel vs. Capcom 3. And honestly, that's not even the only cancellation I'm still salty about. A while back, I made a whole video covering games that got axed before their time, including that Marvel project. So if you want to take a slightly deeper dive into it and check out other titles that we missed out on, that video should be popping up on your screen right about now. By the way, I'm working on a sequel to that video, so make sure you liked and subscribed. Enough of that though. Enjoy your Thanksgiving, stay safe during Black Friday, and I'm Audi 51,000G, kinfolk.